everyone. Some of you guys might know me as a new dog owner. Honestly, did not imagine this for myself, the bingo or the dog, but I'm very happy. My name is Alisa. I'm a behavioral scientist, and my background is actually in organizational behavior. Um, At Atlassian, I lead a team within the Teamwork Lab, and we are a group of researchers that are designing best practices for modern teamwork. You can think of us as the geek squad for your collaboration problems. And today I'm here because I have the privilege of designing research studies to evolve our approach to offices alongside our amazing workplace experience team, some of whom are here today. Over the past several years, when a lot of other companies were figuring out return to office, Atlassian actually doubled down on a fully distributed approach. So we gave employees the option to choose where they wanted to work every day. And this flexibility on where we work really forced us to reconsider how we worked and the role that offices were going to play in that. So today I'm going to talk about some of the lessons that we learned, and I'm hoping that it'll spark some ideas about how we might navigate this new future of work that we're now facing with AI. But before we get into offices, I want to just share some of the ways we work a little bit differently at Atlassian. So some of you guys might know us as the folks behind Jira or Confluence or Loom. And essentially, we're creating software to help kind of unleash the potential of every team. And so we're constantly experimenting ourselves with new ways of working. So for example, here's what we don't do. We don't use presentations. We facilitate meetings by creating clear and concise Confluence pages. We also don't use email internally. We only use Slack. And then finally, we really try to cut down on endless meetings so that people have plenty of time to focus on their top priorities. And I share this because this different way of working, coupled with the flexibility in where we work, meant that we really needed to fundamentally rethink the role that offices were going to play. And by the way, I have to give so much credit to Annie Dean, who Phil mentioned and now works with Jamie, but she was our fearless leader and really helped to set the vision for this journey. So today I'm going to talk through 3 big shifts in our approach to offices over the past 5 years. The first one is about our mindset to offices. The second is how we organize our spaces. And the third is how we facilitate connection. Our first big shift is that we needed to think about offices not as necessities, but as products. So because people didn't have to come into the office every day, we had to start treating our offices as products that really actively drew people in. So our baseline was we really needed to understand what people's realities were when they were working at home and try to create some parity with that when they went into the office. So there were 2 expectations that we found. One, people have an increased need now for quiet in order to focus, and also for privacy for their calls. So we built new collaboration studios. These are kind of essentially work from home setups in the office. They have great tech, great lighting, and they're great for higher stake calls such as customer calls. But we also learned that we couldn't get rid of phone booths, right? And we made those non-bookable because they were great for quick and impromptu conversations. At the same time, we were interviewing a lot of people and they were telling us they had no idea what the norms were in the office for taking calls out in the open, right? Some of them saw it as rude, but others were like, well, this is how it used to be done. We all had to take calls out in the open because there's no other space. And so we designed the virtual call zone. You can think of this as the opposite of a library space. And these are open, beautiful spaces where people could take calls out in the open without feeling self-conscious. We also had to ask, what does the office offer that home could never provide? And so perhaps not surprisingly, the biggest pull factor was other coworkers. So this is an analysis that we conducted, and in this graph, every point represents a specific day in the calendar year. And what we found is as the number of out-of-towners increased, so did the number of locals who are coming into the office. And by the way, this is excluding all the data that we had for on-sites. So this is just business as usual. And essentially what this was suggesting was that there was a social coordination effect happening. People were coordinating with each other, even without Atlassian's intervention. But what we wanted was to dial this up even more, so we created a program called Teams in Town, where essentially we were providing more visibility by announcing in local Slack channels the teams that were going to come into the office the following week. Now, with all this social energy that was happening in the office, then we started hearing a lot of complaints about feeling really drained, right? People are really used to staying at home, and now they have to be on for a long time, and they just want to be in stealth mode in the office. So we had to think about what we call recharge spaces, just a place where you could hide for a little bit and have a moment to yourself. So this is a space that we have in Sydney. It's called the retreat space, and you can see that it's green, it's lush, it feels safe and cozy, even though it's in a public area. And from the speakers, you can hear sounds of the forest and of birds. And through our ethnographic study, we found that this was the most popular space in the Sydney office. Now, just as products have user onboarding, we were finding that our office really needed them too, because we had such a wide range of people and their frequencies of how often they were coming into the office. So, we had documentation, we had signage, but that could only go so far. So we really leaned in heavily into the design itself, right? What were the sensory cues? What was the lighting? What were the colors, the layout? And how can all of those work together to clearly but quietly signal the right etiquette for each space? The second shift is going from organizing spaces by team to organizing spaces by type of work. So it used to be the case that marketing was on one floor, product was on another floor. All of them had a bank of workstations next to some tables, next to some soft seating, next to some meeting rooms. And we found quickly that actually in the distributed model, this wasn't going to work for us, right? It just wasn't an efficient use of our space. So instead, we bet on what we call design by etiquette, which is one space, one primary work mode, one etiquette. So for example, if your team really need to make fast progress on a project, you might book out one of our really popular sprint rooms. If you needed to work on a call all day, maybe you would head to the virtual call zone. And if you needed to collaborate, maybe you would go to the collaboration floor where there's coffee and tables and soft seating. And in this design, what we're doing is we're making people move around a lot, right? But we're betting that that movement will be worth it. Because when you're working on really difficult problems that require deep thinking, sometimes spending those 1 to 2 hours in the library space to focus can make the difference. And this is really consistent with our ways of working. So this is one of our most popular experiments from the lab called Redesign Your Work Week. And essentially, we ask people to take back control of their calendars by setting the top priorities for the week and then making sure to proactively block time for focus and for open collaboration. And what we found was that this led to a 32% boost in focus, as well as a 31% boost in driving progress towards top priorities. Now, what does this look like in the office? So for example, on Monday, if you only have one one-on-one and the rest of your time is for just focus, you might go to the library floor. And on Tuesday, if you have meetings in the morning, you might go to the collaborative space, you might go to one of the private collaboration studios. And then in the afternoon, when you have a focus block, you might go back to the library floor. And what we want to do is we want people to be really intentional and thoughtful about their workday. And so as a result, designing spaces by types of work really helps to support that behavior. Ultimately, we learned that mixing work modes creates competing rules of behavior. But if you assign a clear etiquette to each space, what you're doing is you're empowering your people to self-sort into the right environment for their day. And then finally, the third shift was going from everyday connection to intentional connection. So with a distributed approach, we still believe that face-to-face connection was really important. We just didn't believe that it would need to happen every day. So in 2022, we launched the program called Intentional Team Gatherings, also known as ITGs, where we gave teams dedicated budget and time in order to self-organize and host on-sites on one of our offices every couple of months. And essentially overnight, our offices turned into full-on event spaces, and our employees, most of whom were engineers, needed to learn how to become event planners. Over the years, the ITG program has become the flagship program for Atlassian, and we're continuing to iterate on it. So for example, we just conducted a study where right when people are submitting their tickets for the ITG, a couple days before they come on site, we ask them for their agendas. And so we have this great corpus of agendas, and we just really wanted to figure out what the heck are people doing in them, and is it actually effective, right? So we analyzed this data, and what we found was that actually there were three main types of gatherings that people were having. Do the work ITGs, you're just trying to drive progress on a project, plan the work, and learn about the work ITGs. You're developing relevant knowledge and business context. We were also finding that there were 5 categories of activities that people would do in these gatherings. You're either doing core work, you're planning, you're learning, you're doing some team building, and this is specifically you're learning how to collaborate with each other, right? So maybe you're figuring out each other's strengths or what rhythms you're gonna have, what processes are you gonna have. And then you have social time, right? So you can think of this as the escape room or the meal that you guys are gonna have together. And importantly, what we learned was that planners are not very discerning about team building versus social time. They kind of see these as interchangeable, but our data suggests that actually it's team building and planning that were the strongest drivers for future team effectiveness. And then finally, we found that the sequencing of events really matter. So we found that it was most helpful to start with the team building up front in the week so that people could build trust and comfort with each other, and then get on the same page through planning so that by the end of the week you could execute effectively. We also learned a lot about what spaces needed to be in place in order for the ITGs to function well. So in the beginning, what we did was we had ITGs on the local work floors, and we found that it was really disruptive. And so now we have dedicated spaces for ITGs, dedicated floors just to ITGs, and we found that that worked a lot better. We also found that for an ITG to work very well, particularly the larger ITGs, it's good to think about it as a suite of components that you need. So we found that it was helpful to have some workstations next to some phone booths, next to some soft seating, next to an enclosed workspace, meeting space. And really, these components together led to kind of a self-sustaining ecosystem for the teams. So despite Atlassian's optional office policy, we're finding that growth in office attendance is outpacing growth in headcount. So 95% of employees have visited an office in 2025. We find that 93% are satisfied with our office experience, and more people are becoming regulars. And then finally, we're doing this efficiently. I think Phil had mentioned this before, but we measure cost per visit, and we're finding this year that we're having an 11% reduction in cost per visit. When we first started this journey, we thought that the lessons were going to be specific to distributed work, but actually they're still relevant in this era of AI. So for example, treating offices as a product. So with AI, there's going to be even a greater demand for designing experiences that AI can't replace. So things like culture, connection, creative energy. And then also we need to think about how AI is going to transform our solo and collaborative spaces. So for example, when you're brainstorming with your team, is there actually going to be a devil's advocate agent who is interjecting into the conversation to make sure you are considering other perspectives and questioning your assumptions? And when you need to write your first draft, is there a phone booth that you'll just be able to talk freely, and then there's going to be an agent who is going to create a polished summary afterwards? And the key here is really to design spaces that are going to reflect this new way of working in AI. And finally, we also need to think about intentional connections. What are the spaces that we're going to reserve solely for human-to-human connections? And then what are the new space types that are going to arise as a result of connecting with our AI teammates, right? So this could be text, voice, or some other form we haven't yet fully imagined. So I think what going distributed really allowed Atlassian to do was to create a new playbook for the office. And I think with AI, we're being pushed again once more, and we're navigating it with everyone here. And I really think that the more that we can start by starting and experiment today and take risks today, the more that we're going to set the standard for the new generation of workspaces. Thank you.